Nikki Kay.
Mr Speaker, I'm very pleased to add my contribution to the Subordinate Legislation Confirmation and Validation Bill. I hope that all members of the House support the passage of this bill. It's a small but important bill which validates or confirms orders and regulations under a wide range of legislation. The bill is considered every year in order to prevent any of the items of delegated legislation from lapsing. The orders and regulations of this bill are generally technical, although we have heard a very eloquent speech from the Honourable Annette King, and we have heard the variety of things that are in this particular piece of legislation. We've got 7 commodity levies to 5 orders under the Customs and Excise Act. We also, as well as has mentioned by Annette King, a set of regulations made under the Road User Charges Act are confirmed. Mr Speaker, this bill should not take up the House's time unduly, but is important that we give the same level of careful attention to this as we do to every bill. Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to support this bill to the House.
Good Speaker.
Grant Robertson.
It's a pleasure and somewhat of a surprise to take a call on the Subordinate Legislation Confirmation and Validation Bill. But as all of the speakers who have spoken so far have indicated, this is a significant bill in the sense that while it has a name that sounds innocuous, if not deadly dull, it does actually cover some matters of significance to New Zealanders. As my colleague Annette King has noted, a bill like this effectively just allows the process of laws and regulations to carry on without having to go through specific legislation for each of them, but where there are levies or consequential actions of legislation, this bill allows those to be continued and validated and confirmed, as is noted here. But the subject matter, Mr Speaker, of those is indeed significant, and my colleague Annette King has mentioned a couple of those. It is quite notable around the question of tobacco and alcohol that using this mechanism is a much more sensible way of being able to manage the ongoing nature of those levies, rather than, as she noted, the late night, budget night activities of people desperately finding their way to sources of petrol and cigarettes and for fear of what might happen. I did think the story that Annette King told about the National Party backbencher of the 1980 Wellington member. We're getting a little more information, Mr Speaker, now about just who this person might be. But that particular member who did that perhaps epitomised that the National Party still hasn't quite worked out how to do its sums, hasn't caught up with what goes on when it comes to the change in system, thinking that they were planning ahead but getting it wrong. That's the National Party through and through, Mr Speaker. Which Jonathan Coleman's interjecting about people being able to do their numbers. I don't think the maestro from Mount Albert should be talking about getting his numbers right. Jonathan Coleman is one person who, when it comes to adding up numbers, should just keep quiet, in my view, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, in addition to the Customs and Excise Act changes that Annette King has mentioned, I just wanted to speak briefly on what is Clause 10 of the bill, which are some changes around the New Zealand superannuation and retirement income rates. And this is an area where we've finally seen some action from the National Party, albeit action that's virtually automated on this matter. But certainly there are ongoing attention to the question of the sustainability of our superannuation has been severely lacking. John Key has continually said that it's not his responsibility to try and deal with these matters because nothing will occur in terms of the lack of sustainability of the scheme for 10, 15, 20 years. Well, Mr Speaker, while an automated increases is contained in this bill might be useful, what would be really useful from this government would be if they took seriously the challenge of sustainability of superannuation in New Zealand, if they actually decided that it was worth thinking about something beyond a 3-year electoral cycle and looked at what we need to do as a country to ensure that New Zealanders are looked after in their retirement. So simply rolling over provisions, extending out the rates and benefits within an Act might be one thing. What we would like to see is this government taking seriously the challenge of providing superannuation into the future for the range of New Zealanders. We all know in this House that the cost of superannuation will soon exceed the education budget, and we actually need to be taking seriously how we as a country, looking forward to the next generations, the retirement of the baby boomers, that we actually have sustainable superannuation. Putting the head in the sand, as the national government is doing, the ostrich economics approach is simply not good enough, Mr. Speaker. We need a government that's prepared to actually plan for the future, to plan for 20 years out, because that's the responsibility we as parliamentarians are charged with. Not just dealing with what's in front of us today, but ensuring that tomorrow and in the future we have a sustainable superannuation scheme that can allow New Zealanders to live with dignity in retirement. And at the moment the government has its head stuck in the sand. The only thing it's prepared to do is what is virtually automatic, which is to increase these rates. So, Mr. Speaker, there are many other matters in this bill that I'm sure my colleagues will refer to in their speeches. We of course support this bill because it's about the efficient running of government, but the government needs to ensure that the substantive matters covered in this bill are dealt with in a proper way and with the kind of vigour New Zealanders would expect from a government that actually has an eye to the future.
Julianne Gento.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tēnā koe. I rise to take a very short call on the Subordinate Legislation Confirmation and Validation Bill, which the Green Party will be supporting. As with these sorts of bills from other years, as many speakers have mentioned today already, it just consists of very technical regulations and orders which are extremely uncontroversial. The Regulation Review Committee's correspondence showed that all relevant departments considered it necessary to have the regulations in question confirmed or validated. If confirming these regulations will assist with the proper functioning of departments, then it is definitely most worthwhile to support the bill. So it was no great surprise to see that the Regulation Review Committee recommended it be passed without amendments, and we joined the committee in thanking the relevant departments for their assistance. What was more interesting was the recommendation by the committee that the government examine the viability of introducing bills seeking confirmation and/or validation of subordinate legislation earlier